My best friend posted my private photos online and created a fake sugar daddy profile to destroy me in high school. I nearly died because of her. 6 years later, she wanted to be friends again, and when I said no, she broke into my apartment. Sarah was the reason I thought love existed. We had been inseparable since 3rd grade. She knew everything about me, including all my passwords, because we maintained each other's Snapchat streaks. That level of trust was normal for us. We were basically sisters. But everything changed in junior year, because that's when I dated this guy called Beck. Things got serious, and I felt safe sending him stuff from my eyes only on Snapchat. And for months, everything was fine, until Jake Morrison pulled me aside after chemistry class. He showed me his phone and asked if this Instagram account was really mine. My stomach dropped when I saw the photos. Someone had created a fake profile using my pictures and followed hundreds of old men. The bio said I was looking for a sugar daddy, with my actual school listed, and there were only 2 people it could have been, Sarah or Beck. I wanted it to be Beck, so I asked Sarah first. I expected her to deny it and get offended that I even accused her, but instead, she broke down crying. Turns out she had shown the photos to her boyfriend Tyler just to brag about how much I trusted her. Tyler had screenshotted them and shared them with his friends. When Sarah found out, she panicked and created the fake account, but it was all in my favor, because she wanted to make it look like I was just some attention seeker so people wouldn't take it seriously. Like what? Her parents got involved fast, and my mom decided to drop it. You see, my mom was their housekeeper, and Sarah's mom Sandra said she needed this to go away quietly, and my mom needed that job desperately since my dad had left the year before, so we followed their wishes. But the bullying at school was relentless. I got called every name you could ever think of. The only people who wanted to be around me anymore were the random men messaging me online. They raved about how innocent and pure I looked. Some even sent essays on what they'd do to me if given the chance. I thought Sarah would still be in my corner, but I was wrong. She not only started ignoring me, but also joined in with the bullying to save face with her friend group. She'd walk past me in the halls laughing with the same people sharing my photos. So I did what any rational teenager would do in that situation. I waited until 3 a.m. one night and downed all the pills I could find. I thought it was a guarantee. I just wanted everything to stop, but luckily, I ended up in hospital, where the nurses resuscitated me. While I was there, Sarah posted this long thing about mental health awareness and how we need to be kinder to each other. She even tagged me in the caption. Tyler commented with heart emojis. My family tried getting lawyers involved, but Sandra had better ones. We ended up moving to a different district for my senior year. I deleted all social media and spent years in therapy. Good riddance. I honestly thought I was never going to see her again, but a few months ago, I got the message on LinkedIn. It was Sarah. She wrote this long message about how she's grown so much as a person, that she was getting to Jake Morrison of all people, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my chest. And as I scrolled her account, I realized why. Because she was still best friends with every single person who tortured me. Her recent posts were all about her new teaching job and how excited she is to shape young minds. So I talked to my therapist about it, and we both figured that it might be good closure. Fast forward to a week later, and I was walking to meet my childhood best friend slash bully at my local Starbucks. Funny how life works. The first thing I noticed was the huge Louis Vuitton bag on her shoulder, and the entire time she kept shifting the conversation back to her charity work with troubled teens. I had already decided that I didn't want her to be part of my life again, so I wasn't even going to bring up the past. But just before I could run away, she whipped out a white box from her purse. It was a Tiffany bracelet as an apology gift. We were just kids who made mistakes. I hope this can represent the birth of our new friendship. She then broke out into a speech about how the whole friend group has grown so much, and they often reminisce about high school. I told her about the 2 other sewer slide attempts she never knew about. I explained that I'm still in therapy twice a week 6 years later because of what she did. "It's not my fault that you're living in the past," she blurted. "And I noticed your eyes staring at me. I know you're jealous of my wealth. That's nothing new. But you agreed to meet me, so I know you forgive me, even if you pretend not to." I swear I thought she was pranking me, but that's when she crossed her arms and began to sulk. I stood up and told her forgiveness doesn't mean giving her access to hurt me again. I said I hoped her students never trust her the way I trusted her. Then I left, and she didn't know it at the time, but our meetup was only phase 1 of my revenge plan to turn her life upside down. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Sarah. Her voicemails started sweet, but quickly turned nasty. The last one accused me of trying to ruin her engagement by making her look bad. I blocked her number and went to work, thinking that would be the end of it. 2 days later, my manager pulled me into her office. Someone had called claiming I was mentally unstable and shouldn't be working with customers. The caller said I had a history of making false accusations against people. My manager knew me well enough to be skeptical, but she had to document the complaint. I knew immediately who was behind it. That evening, I found Sarah waiting by my car in the parking garage. She was wearing designer sunglasses and holding her phone like a weapon. When she saw me, she started recording. I kept walking, keys between my fingers, heart pounding. She followed me, asking why I was being so dramatic, why I couldn't just accept her apology like a normal person. I got in my car without saying a word and drove away, watching her shrink in my rearview mirror. The harassment escalated quickly. Fake dating profiles appeared with my photos and work information. My LinkedIn started getting messages from men referencing things only someone with access to my old photos would know. Reviews appeared on my company's Google page mentioning me by name, calling me unprofessional and unstable. Each one was posted by accounts created that same day. I documented everything and went to the police. The officer took my report but said without proof it was Sarah, there wasn't much they could do. Cyberbullying cases were hard to prosecute, especially when the perpetrator was smart enough to use VPNs and fake accounts. He suggested I change my number and lay low, but laying low wasn't an option when Sarah started showing up at my regular spots. She'd be at my gym, stretching near my usual treadmill treadmill. At my grocery store, examining produce in the aisle I always shopped. At the park where I walked my neighbor's dog on weekends. Always with that same innocent smile, always pretending it was coincidence. My therapist helped me recognize the pattern. Sarah couldn't handle rejection. In high school, she'd destroyed my reputation rather than admit she'd betrayed me. Now, faced with my refusal to forgive her, she was trying to destroy my peace. We increased my sessions and worked on coping strategies, but I was exhausted from constantly looking over my shoulder. The breaking point came when my mom called crying. Sandra had contacted her, saying she'd heard I was spreading lies about Sarah again. She reminded my mom that she owned the house my mom rented, and that lease renewals weren't guaranteed. My mom, who'd worked so hard to rebuild after my dad left, was terrified of being homeless. She begged me to apologize to Sarah, to make this go away. I drove to my mom's house that night and found her surrounded by paperwork, calculating how much she'd need to move if Sandra didn't renew her lease. The woman who'd sacrificed everything for me was being punished for my refusal to play along with Sarah's narrative. I held her while she cried, promising I'd fix this somehow. The next day, I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I unblocked Sarah and sent her a message. I asked if we could meet again, said I'd been too emotional at Starbucks. She responded within minutes, suggesting dinner at an upscale restaurant. Of course she'd want witnesses for her victory. I spent the afternoon preparing. I bought a small voice recorder and practiced keeping my face neutral in the mirror. I wrote down every incident since our coffee meeting, every fake profile, every harassing message. If she wanted to play games, I'd document every move. Sarah arrived at the restaurant glowing with triumph. She air-kissed my cheek and immediately launched into how glad she was that I'd come to my senses. She ordered expensive wine and told me about her wedding plans, how she wanted me to be there to show everyone we'd moved past our little high school drama. I let her talk, occasionally asking questions that seemed supportive but were designed to make her reveal more. She admitted she'd been worried about what I might say to people, that she'd taken steps to protect her reputation. When I asked what kind of steps, she laughed and said she'd just made sure people knew my history of mental health struggles. The wine loosened her tongue. She started reminiscing about high school, but her version was twisted. In her telling, she'd been my protector, the only reason I hadn't been bullied worse. She'd done me a favor by creating that Instagram account, giving people a reason to dismiss the photos as fake. Tyler had been wrong to share them, sure, but boys would be boys. I excused myself to the bathroom and had to grip the sink to stop shaking. The recorder in my pocket felt heavy with her admissions. When I returned, Sarah was typing on her phone. She looked up with a strange smile and said she'd just been texting her mom about how well our dinner was going. The food arrived, but I could barely eat. Sarah kept refilling my wine glass, even though I'd barely touched it. She started talking about her teaching job, how rewarding it was to mentor young girls. She said she'd learned so much from our friendship, about the importance of trust and loyalty. The irony made me nauseous. As dessert arrived, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her smile widened. My mom says she's so relieved we're working things out. She never wanted to be harsh with your mother, but she has to think about her properties, you know? Good tenants are so hard to find these days. The threat was clear. Play along or my mom would suffer. I forced myself to smile and say I understood. Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her engagement ring cutting into my palm. She said she knew I'd make the right choice, that I'd always been smart when it counted. The check came and Sarah insisted on paying, making a show of her platinum credit card. As we walked to the parking lot, she linked her arm through mine like we were teenagers again. She said she'd text me about wedding dress shopping, that it would be like old times. I nodded, not trusting my voice. At my car, she hugged me tightly and whispered that she was proud of me for letting go of the past. She said trauma could make people create false memories, that therapy sometimes made things worse, but she forgave me for everything I'd imagined she'd done. The gaslighting was so smooth, I almost doubted myself. I drove home in silence, the recorder burning in my pocket. Inside my apartment, I listened to the whole conversation again. Her admissions were there but carefully worded, nothing explicitly incriminating. She was too smart for that. But I had something now, evidence of her harassment and threats against my mom. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah with her students, young girls who trusted her. How many of them shared secrets with their favorite teacher? How many thought she was their friend? The pattern was clear. Sarah chose vulnerable people, gained their trust, then used it against them when they didn't serve her purposes anymore. I made a decision. I wouldn't let her do to those girls what she'd done to me, but I had to be smart about it. Sarah had money, connections, and a spotless public image. I had trauma, a history of mental health struggles, and a mom who needed her home. The deck was stacked against me. Over the next few days, I played along with Sarah's fantasy. I responded to her text with enthusiasm, sent heart emojis when she shared wedding inspiration photos. She added me to a group chat with her bridesmaids, all the same girls who'd tormented me in high school. They welcomed me like nothing had happened, like they hadn't spent a year calling me names and sharing my photos. Meanwhile, I researched. I found Sarah's school district policies on teacher conduct. I looked up Sandra's other rental properties and found reviews mentioning suspicious rent increases and threats of eviction. I created a new email account and started documenting everything meticulously. Sarah invited me to lunch with her teacher friends. I went, smiling and nodding as she told edited versions of our friendship. She painted herself as my savior, the one who'd stood by me through my difficulties. Her colleagues looked at me with pity, clearly buying her narrative. I excused myself early, claiming a work meeting. That afternoon, my mom called. Sandra had stopped by personally to say how happy she was that Sarah and I were reconnecting. She'd even offered to reduce the rent slightly as a show of good faith. My mom was relieved, but I heard the fear still lurking in her voice. We were all trapped in Sarah's web. I started having nightmares again, the same ones from high school. I'd wake up gasping, sure that everyone had seen the photos again. My therapist prescribed sleeping medication, but I was afraid to take it. I needed to stay alert, to watch for Sarah's next move. It came sooner than expected. Sarah texted texted asking if I'd speak to her class about overcoming adversity. She said my story of surviving cyberbullying would inspire her students. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted me to stand in front of teenagers and tell them about trauma she'd caused, all while she played the supportive mentor. I agreed, because saying no wasn't an option anymore. But I also started reaching out carefully to other people from our high school. I created a fake Facebook account and joined our alumni group. I posted a vague question about whether anyone else had experienced bullying that still affected them. The responses poured in. 3 people privately messaged me about Sarah specifically. One girl said Sarah had spread rumors about her in sophomore year after she'd refused to help her cheat on a test. Another mentioned how Sarah had dated her boyfriend behind her back, then convinced everyone she was the one who'd been betrayed. A guy shared how Sarah had falsely accused him of stalking her when he'd tried to expose her lies. We started a group chat, comparing stories. The patterns were undeniable. Sarah would befriend vulnerable people, gain their trust, then destroy them if they crossed her. She always positioned herself as the victim, using her charm and family connections to avoid consequences. We'd all suffered in isolation, thinking we were alone. One of the women in our group, Catherine, was a parent at Sarah's school. Her daughter had mentioned how Miss Sarah always wanted to know about problems at home, how she encouraged students to share secrets in their journal assignments. Catherine had thought it was good teaching until her daughter became withdrawn after refusing to share something personal. We decided to meet in person. 5 of us gathered at a coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Sarah might appear. Seeing their faces, hearing their stories, I realized the scope of what Sarah had done. She'd left a trail of destroyed trust and damaged people, all while building her perfect life. Catherine's daughter joined us halfway through. She was 15, the same age I'd been when everything happened. She told us how Miss Sarah had started favoring students who shared personal information and ignoring those who didn't. How she'd make comments about certain girls' appearances or home lives in front of the class, disguised as concern. The girl's hands trembled as she spoke, and I recognized that same fear I'd carried for years. Catherine put a protective arm around her daughter, while the rest of us exchanged knowing looks. We weren't just dealing with our past anymore. Sarah was actively creating new victims. That night, I compiled everything from our meeting into a document. Screenshots of our group chat, timestamps of Sarah's behavior patterns, Catherine's daughter's testimony. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, driven by a determination I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protection. The next morning, Sarah texted me about visiting her classroom. She'd already told her students about her brave friend who'd overcome cyberbullying. The performance date was set for Friday. I had 3 days to figure out how to handle this without endangering my mom's housing situation. I met with my therapist for an emergency session. She listened as I explained the situation, her face growing more concerned with each detail. She reminded me that my healing journey didn't require me to save everyone else, but she understood why I felt compelled to act. We worked through scenarios, planning responses that would keep me safe while potentially helping those students. Thursday afternoon, Catherine called me in tears. Her daughter had come home with a journal assignment asking students to write about their deepest family secrets for a trust-building exercise. The prompt specifically said the journals would remain private, but Catherine's daughter remembered what happened to other girls who'd refused similar assignments. They'd been subtly excluded from group activities and received lower participation grades. I told Catherine to document everything and save the assignment sheet. Then I called the other members of our support group. Within hours, we had 3 more parents confirming similar experiences. Their children had been pressured to share personal information, then faced consequences when they declined. That evening, I sat in my car outside the school district office, the folder of evidence heavy in my lap. Going through official channels felt risky. Sarah had connections, and her mother's influence extended far beyond rental properties. But those students deserved protection. Instead, I drove to the local library and spent hours researching. I found the school's anonymous reporting system and carefully submitted our concerns, attaching the documented patterns while keeping identifying information minimal. It wasn't enough to stop her immediately, but it would create a paper trail. Friday morning arrived too quickly. I stood outside Sarah's classroom, watching through the small window as she arranged chairs in a circle. She'd dressed professionally but approachably, the perfect image of a trustworthy educator. When she spotted me, her smile was triumphant. The students filed in, mostly girls around 15 or 16. They looked at me with curious eyes as Sarah introduced me as her oldest friend, who'd survived terrible cyberbullying in high school. She painted herself as my constant support system, the one who'd helped me through my darkest moments. The lies flowed so smoothly that I almost believed them myself. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at those young faces and made a choice. I told them about the importance of trusted adults, but I also emphasized the difference between sharing and being pressured to share. I talked about how true friends respect boundaries, and how anyone who threatens consequences for maintaining privacy isn't acting in their best interest. Sarah's smile grew tighter with each word. When I mentioned that predators often start by requesting small secrets before escalating their demands, her knuckles went white against her desk. The students were listening intently, some nodding in recognition. After class, Sarah cornered me in the hallway. Her professional mask had slipped, revealing the same cruel teenager I'd known. She hissed that I'd overstepped, that I had no right to undermine her teaching methods. When I remained calm, she switched tactics, reminding me about my mother's housing situation. I left the school shaking but oddly empowered. Those students had heard my message. Even if Sarah twisted it later, the seed of doubt was planted. They might think twice before sharing secrets they wanted to keep private. That weekend, Sarah's harassment escalated dramatically. My work email was flooded with spam, all traceable to signups from the previous day. My car tires were mysteriously low on air 2 mornings in a row. Random food deliveries showed up at my apartment at all hours, always paid with cash, always from different restaurants. I documented everything, adding to my growing file. The other members of our support group reported similar harassment. Catherine found her social media accounts tagged in inappropriate content. Another parent discovered their child had been moved to a different class without explanation. Sarah was fighting back, but her desperation was showing. Monday brought a new development. My manager called me in again, this time with IT present. Someone had attempted to access my work computer remotely over the weekend. The attempt had failed thanks to our security protocols, but the IP address traced back to a coffee shop near Sarah's apartment. It wasn't proof, but it was another piece of the puzzle. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Christopher, another former classmate. He'd heard about our support group through the alumni network and wanted to share his story. In sophomore year, Sarah had convinced him to help her cheat on a major exam. When they were caught, she'd tearfully claimed he'd pressured her into it. He'd been suspended while she received a warning. Christopher still had the text messages from that time, saved on an old phone he'd kept. Sarah's messages clearly showed her planning the cheating scheme and coaching him on what to do. He'd never come forward before because Sarah's family had threatened his parents' small business with legal action. We met at a diner outside town where Christopher showed me the messages. The manipulation tactics were identical to what she'd used on me and others. She'd identified his vulnerability, struggling grades, and fear of disappointing his parents, then exploited it. When caught, she'd immediately positioned herself as the victim. As we talked, Christopher mentioned something that made my blood run cold. His younger sister was now in Sarah's class. She'd recently started having anxiety about school, particularly about journal assignments. The pattern was continuing with a new generation. That night, I called an emergency meeting of our support group. We gathered at Catherine's house, away from any place Sarah might monitor. The evidence we'd collected painted a clear picture of ongoing predatory behavior. We had testimonies, documents, and patterns spanning over a decade, but we still faced the challenge of Sarah's protected status. Catherine suggested we reach out to a journalist she knew who specialized in education issues. The reporter had won awards for exposing misconduct in schools. It was risky. Sarah would know we were behind any story, but the anonymous reports weren't generating quick enough action. Before we could decide, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Sandra had shown up at her door with a lease termination notice, claiming she needed the property for family use. The eviction date was set for 30 days out. My mom's voice shook as she asked what she'd done wrong. I drove straight to my mom's house, rage and fear battling in my chest. Sandra's message was clear: back off or face homelessness. My mom sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by boxes she'd already started packing. She'd lived here for 8 years, built a life after my father left. Now it was being ripped away because I wouldn't play along with Sarah's delusions. I held my mom as she cried, promising we'd figure something out. But inside, I was calculating. Rental prices had skyrocketed since she'd signed her lease. Finding something comparable on her income would be nearly impossible. Sandra knew exactly what she was doing. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Christopher and asked for his help with something technical. If Sarah wanted to play dirty, I needed to understand what I was up against. Christopher had IT skills from his computer science degree. He agreed to help, understanding the stakes. We met at his apartment where he showed me how to check for tracking software on my devices. Sure enough, my phone had been compromised. Someone had installed monitoring software during one of Sarah's coincidental encounters. They could see my messages, track my location, and access my photos. The violation felt familiar, like being exposed all over again. Christopher helped me secure my devices and set up new encrypted communication channels for our support group. He also discovered something disturbing. Sarah had been using school resources to research each of us. Her work computer showed searches for our addresses, employers, and social media accounts. She'd been building files on everyone who'd ever crossed her. The next day, Catherine's daughter came home from school in tears. Sarah had singled her out in class, making veiled comments about students who spread rumors about teachers. Other students had started avoiding her, afraid of becoming targets themselves. The psychological warfare was affecting a child, and I couldn't stand by anymore. I contacted the journalist Catherine had mentioned. We met at a park, away from any surveillance. I showed her our evidence, explained the patterns, and shared the current situation with the students. She listened intently, asking probing questions and taking careful notes. She'd investigate independently, she promised, but warned it could take time. Time we didn't have. That evening, Tyler reached out through social media. Sarah's high school boyfriend wanted to meet. My first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won. We met at a public restaurant where he could be seen and recorded. Tyler had aged poorly, his former confidence replaced by nervous energy. He apologized immediately for his role in sharing my photos, claiming he'd been young and stupid, but he hadn't reached out for forgiveness. He was scared of Sarah. They'd reconnected recently when she'd asked for help with computer problems. He'd realized quickly that she wanted him to hack into people's accounts. When he refused, she'd reminded him that she still had messages proving he'd distributed inappropriate images of a minor. The statute of limitations hadn't expired. He could still face charges. Tyler showed me their recent messages. Sarah had become increasingly unstable, demanding he help her protect her reputation from jealous liars. She'd threatened to destroy his current relationship and career if he didn't comply. He'd done some of what she asked, the spam emails and remote access attempts, but drew the line at anything more serious. I recorded our conversation with his consent. Another piece of evidence, another person willing to testify to Sarah's patterns. Tyler agreed to preserve all their communications and promised to refuse any further requests from her. The next morning, I woke to find my car vandalized. Someone had spray-painted words across the windshield, the same names I'd been called in high school. My neighbor's security camera had mysteriously malfunctioned overnight. The police took a report, but without evidence, there was nothing they could do. I was cleaning the glass when Catherine called. The school had responded to the anonymous reports. They'd scheduled scheduled a meeting with Sarah to discuss the concerns about her teaching methods. It wasn't much, but it was movement. Sarah would know someone had reported her. Her retaliation was swift. That afternoon, my workplace received a bomb threat mentioning me specifically. The building was evacuated while police searched. Nothing was found, but the disruption cost the company thousands in lost productivity. My manager assured me they didn't blame me, but I saw the doubt creeping into colleagues' eyes. The stress was affecting my health. I wasn't sleeping, could barely eat, and my therapy sessions had doubled. My therapist worried about my stability, especially given my history, but I couldn't stop. Too many people were counting on me, and Sarah's behavior was escalating dangerously. 3 days before my mom's eviction deadline, we caught a break. One of Sandra's other tenants reached out after finding our support group online. They'd been documenting Sandra's illegal practices for months, including recordings of threats and evidence of price gouging. They were already working with a tenant's rights attorney. The attorney agreed to take my mom's case pro bono, seeing it as part of a larger pattern of abuse. The eviction notice was likely illegal, given the circumstances, but even with legal help, my mom was terrified. She'd started looking for new places anyway, preparing for the worst. Meanwhile, the journalist had made progress. She'd interviewed former students who'd graduated from Sarah's classes. Several reported feeling manipulated into sharing personal information that was later used to maintain control over them. One girl said Sarah had threatened to share her journal entries about family problems if she reported concerning behavior. The school board meeting was scheduled for the following week. Parents were organizing, planning to attend, and voice their concerns. Sarah must have sensed the walls closing in because her behavior became increasingly erratic. She showed up at my workplace, causing a scene in the lobby. Security had to escort her out as she screamed about defamation and jealousy. She sent messages to mutual acquaintances, claiming I was stalking her and trying to ruin her life out of spite. Some believed her, others saw through the manipulation. Then came the night that changed everything. I was returning home late from a support group meeting when I noticed my apartment door slightly open. My heart pounded as I called 911, waiting in my car until police arrived. They found my apartment ransacked, personal items destroyed, and threatening messages scrawled on the walls. The security footage showed a figure in dark clothing, face covered, build unclear. But they'd made one mistake. They'd used a key to enter, and only 3 people had copies: my mom, my landlord, and Sarah, who'd had one since high school that I'd never thought to get back. The police took it seriously this time. Breaking and entering, vandalism, and threats were criminal offenses they couldn't ignore. They collected evidence, documented everything, and asked probing questions about who might have done this. I spent that night at Catherine's house, too shaken to be alone. The support group rallied around me, offering places to stay and emotional support. We were no longer isolated victims. We were a community, united by shared trauma, but strengthened by collective action. The next morning brought unexpected news. The school had placed Sarah on administrative leave pending investigation. Multiple complaints from parents, combined with the anonymous reports, had forced their hand. Sarah couldn't access her classroom or contact students until the investigation concluded. Her response was predictable, but still shocking. She posted a lengthy social media rant about being persecuted by jealous former classmates. She claimed we were coordinating to destroy her career because we couldn't handle our own failures. She positioned herself as a dedicated teacher being attacked by mentally unstable individuals, but her post backfired. Comments poured in from people who'd experienced her manipulation. Former students, colleagues, and community members shared their own stories. The narrative she'd carefully crafted for years was crumbling publicly. Sandra tried damage control, threatening legal action against anyone spreading lies about her daughter, but the tenant's rights attorney responded publicly, announcing a class action lawsuit against her for illegal eviction practices. My mom's situation was no longer isolated, but part of a documented pattern. As the week progressed, more evidence surfaced. The IT department at Sarah's school found irregularities in her computer use. She'd accessed student records beyond her authorization, exported personal information, and used school resources for personal vendettas. Each discovery added weight to the investigation. The journalist's article was published 3 days before the school board meeting. It was thorough, factual, and devastating. She'd interviewed dozens of sources, verified documents, and exposed patterns of behavior spanning years. Sarah's name wasn't mentioned directly due to the ongoing investigation, but anyone familiar with the situation knew. The morning of the school board meeting, I woke to find my mom crying happy tears. The attorney had secured an emergency injunction preventing her eviction. Sandra's threats had been recorded, documented, and presented to a judge who'd seen similar cases before. My mom could stay in her home while the legal process played out. The school board meeting was packed. Parents filled every seat, some standing along the walls. I sat between Catherine and Christopher, my hands steady despite the churning in my stomach. Sarah wasn't there, but Sandra sat in the front row, her designer suit and cold stare meant to intimidate. The board members looked uncomfortable as parent after parent stood to speak. Catherine's daughter bravely shared her experience, voice shaking but determined. Other students followed, describing the pressure to reveal personal information and the consequences of refusing. The board members took notes, their expressions growing more concerned with each testimony. Sandra tried to interrupt several times, claiming the accusations were coordinated harassment. The board chair shut her down, reminding her this was a time for public comment, not debate. Her face flushed with anger, but she stayed silent. After the meeting, we gathered in the parking lot. The board had promised a thorough investigation, but we knew Sarah's connections might still protect her. That's when Tyler appeared, looking even more nervous than at our dinner. He handed me a USB drive without a word and hurried away. Back at Catherine's house, we plugged in the drive. Tyler had saved everything. Years of messages between him and Sarah, including recent ones where she'd explicitly asked him to hack our accounts and plant evidence. She'd even sent him our photos and personal information she'd gathered. The the smoking firearm we needed. I forwarded everything to the journalist and the school board that night. The next morning, my phone rang before dawn. It was my mom, panicked. Someone had broken into her house while she slept, going through her papers but taking nothing. The police were there, but she was terrified. I rushed over to find her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The officer said there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting someone had a key. My mom remembered Sandra had kept a copy from when she'd done property inspections. Another piece of evidence, another violation. That afternoon, Sarah called from a blocked number. Her voice was different, desperate rather than confident. She demanded I meet her alone, said she had something important to tell me. When I refused, she started crying, saying I'd ruined her life over petty jealousy. I hung up and immediately reported the contact to the police. The school board called an emergency meeting 2 days later. They'd completed their preliminary investigation and found enough evidence to terminate Sarah immediately. The IT audit had revealed she'd accessed confidential student records and used school computers for personal harassment campaigns. Parents had provided documentation of inappropriate assignments and pressure tactics. Sarah's termination made the local news. The reporter who'd been investigating published a follow-up article detailing the full scope of her behavior. Former students came forward with their own stories, creating an avalanche of testimony. Sarah's carefully constructed image shattered publicly. Sandra's real estate empire faced its own crisis. The tenants' rights attorney had filed complaints with the housing authority, triggering an investigation into her business practices. Other tenants came forward with stories of illegal evictions, price gouging, and harassment. My mom's situation had exposed a pattern of abuse affecting dozens of families. 3 days after Sarah's termination, she showed up at my apartment building at 2 a.m. I woke to the sound of glass breaking and someone screaming my name. I called 911 while barricading my bedroom door. Through the window, I could see Sarah in the parking lot, smashing car windows with a baseball bat. The police arrived quickly, but Sarah had already damaged 6 vehicles, including mine. She was handcuffed, still screaming about how I'd destroyed her life. Neighbors filmed everything on their phones. This time, there was no denying her actions or claiming mental health issues. She'd been caught red-handed. At the police station, I gave my statement while Sarah was processed. The detective mentioned she'd been carrying a knife and had written rambling notes about making them all pay. They were treating it as a serious threat. With her previous warnings and the break-in at my apartment, she was facing multiple felony charges. The next morning, Sandra showed up at the police station with expensive lawyers, but even her money couldn't make the evidence disappear. Multiple witnesses, security footage, and Sarah's own social media posts had created an undeniable record. The lawyers advised Sarah to take a plea deal. While Sarah sat in jail awaiting arraignment, more truth emerged. The school's investigation revealed she'd been taking money from fundraisers meant for student activities, small amounts over time, but it added up to thousands. She'd used her position to access financial accounts, thinking no one would notice. Embezzlement charges were added to her growing list. Tyler officially came forward to the police, providing all the evidence of Sarah's attempts to involve him in cybercrimes. He admitted to the minor harassment he'd done under pressure, but cooperated fully with investigators. His testimony sealed Sarah's fate regarding the cyberstalking charges. The plea negotiations took weeks. Sarah's lawyers tried to argue mental health issues, claiming she'd snapped under pressure, but the prosecutor had documented patterns of behavior spanning years. This wasn't a breakdown. It was calculated manipulation that had finally caught up with her. Sandra's situation deteriorated rapidly. The housing authority found numerous violations across her properties. She faced massive fines and the potential loss of her real estate license. Many tenants, emboldened by the publicity, began organizing. My mom joined the Tenants Association, finding strength in collective action. Sarah's former teaching colleagues reached out to express their shock and support for the victims. Several admitted they'd noticed concerning behavior but hadn't known how to address it. The school implemented new policies about teacher-student boundaries and mandatory reporting of suspicious conduct. The support group we'd formed evolved into something larger. We created a nonprofit organization focused on helping cyberbullying victims and educating people about manipulation tactics. Catherine took the lead, using her daughter's experience to help other families recognize warning signs. Christopher used his tech skills to create resources for securing personal information online. He gave presentations at schools, teaching students how to protect themselves from digital harassment. His sister, free from Sarah's influence, began thriving again. Sarah's plea deal was finalized 6 months after that night at my apartment. She pled guilty to cyberstalking, harassment, vandalism, and embezzlement. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison, 3 years probation, and mandatory psychological counseling. She was also required to pay restitution to her victims and was banned from teaching or working with minors. Sandra's real estate license was suspended pending further investigation. She faced multiple lawsuits from tenants and criminal charges for illegal eviction practices. Her empire, built on intimidation and exploitation, crumbled. She sold properties to pay legal fees and settlements. I testified at Sarah's sentencing hearing. Looking at her across the courtroom, I saw someone I didn't recognize. The confident, manipulative person was gone, replaced by someone hollow and defeated. I spoke about the impact of her actions, not just on me, but on all her victims. The judge listened carefully, noting the pattern of predatory behavior. After the hearing, Sarah's lawyer approached me with an envelope. Inside was a letter from Sarah, part of her plea agreement. It was a formal apology, clearly written with legal guidance. The words felt empty, but having them in writing provided some closure. The local news covered the sentencing extensively. Sarah's fall from grace became a cautionary tale about abuse of power and the importance of believing victims. The school district implemented new training programs, and other districts reached out to learn from what had happened. My mom's housing situation stabilized. With Sandra's legal troubles, the property management was transferred to a court-appointed administrator who honored existing leases leases at fair rates. My mom became an advocate for tenants' rights, using her experience to help others facing similar situations. The ripple effects continued for months. Former students Sarah had manipulated found the courage to seek therapy. Parents became more involved in their children's education, asking questions about assignments and teaching methods. The culture of silence that had protected Sarah for so long finally broke. As the one-year anniversary of confronting Sarah approached, our support group organized an awareness event. We shared our stories publicly, not for sympathy, but to help others recognize manipulation tactics. The turnout exceeded expectations, with hundreds attending to learn and show support. Sarah served 18 months before being released on good behavior. Part of her probation required her to stay away from all victims and avoid any teaching or mentoring positions. She moved to another state to live with distant relatives, her social media presence completely erased. Sandra's legal troubles continued. She lost her real estate license permanently and faced bankruptcy from the lawsuits and fines. The woman who'd once wielded power through property ownership was reduced to working retail, her influence completely dissolved. Tyler completed his community service and moved forward with his life. He'd testified honestly about his role and expressed genuine remorse. While I couldn't forgive him completely, I appreciated his eventual courage in coming forward. The school where Sarah had taught implemented comprehensive reforms. They established clear guidelines about appropriate teacher-student interactions and created safe reporting channels for concerns. Catherine joined the school board, determined to prevent similar situations. Our nonprofit grew steadily. We partnered with other organizations to provide resources for cyberbullying victims and education about online safety. What started as a support group for Sarah's victims became a force for positive change in our community. I returned to work full-time, my reputation restored after the truth came out. My colleagues, who'd witnessed Sarah's harassment firsthand, became some of my strongest supporters. My manager implemented new security measures to protect employees from similar situations. The anniversary event was emotional but empowering. Survivors shared their stories, parents talked about recognizing warning signs, and educators discussed creating safer environments. Local law enforcement attended, acknowledging they needed better training on cyberstalking and harassment cases. Sarah's story became a case study in psychology programs, examining how predators use positions of trust to manipulate victims. Researchers reached out to interview willing participants from our support group, hoping to better understand the long-term impacts of such abuse. My relationship with my mom grew stronger through the ordeal. She'd stood by me even when it threatened her home, and I'd fought to protect her from Sandra's retaliation. We started having weekly dinners, rebuilding the closeness we'd lost during my darkest years. The legal precedent set by Sarah's case helped other victims. Prosecutors in nearby counties referenced it when pursuing similar charges. The comprehensive documentation we'd maintained became a template for building strong cases against cyberstalkers. 2 years after everything began, I received an unexpected message. It was from a girl who'd been in Sarah's class during the worst of it. She thanked me for speaking up, saying my presentation had given her the courage to refuse an inappropriate assignment. She was now in college, studying to become a counselor herself. Christopher's sister graduated high school with honors, free from the anxiety Sarah had caused. She spoke at our awareness events about the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. Her confidence inspired other young people to speak up. The community transformation was remarkable. What had started as one person's manipulation had led to systemic changes in schools, housing policies, and law enforcement training. Sarah's victims had turned their pain into purpose, creating lasting protections for others. I continued therapy, working through the complex emotions of everything that had happened. The validation of being believed, the relief of justice served, and the satisfaction of helping others didn't erase the trauma, but they made it bearable. My therapist helped me understand that healing wasn't linear. Some days were harder than others, especially when memories surfaced unexpectedly. But I had tools now, and more importantly, I had a community that understood. The final legal matter was settled when Sarah completed her probation. She was required to register as a convicted stalker, limiting her employment options and requiring disclosure to future neighbors. It wasn't the complete justice some wanted, but it was accountability. I ran into Beck at a coffee shop 3 years after everything started. He'd heard about what happened and apologized for his role, however unintentional. We talked briefly about the importance of digital privacy and the responsibility that comes with trust. It was closure I hadn't known I needed. The nonprofit established an annual scholarship for cyberbullying survivors pursuing education. Named after all of Sarah's victims collectively, it represented transformation of pain into opportunity. The first recipient was a young woman whose story eerily mirrored mine. Standing before the crowd at the scholarship ceremony, I thought about the journey from that Starbucks meeting to this moment. Sarah had tried to destroy me twice, but instead had created an army of advocates. Her manipulation had backfired spectacularly. My mom sat in the front row, tears of pride replacing the tears of fear from 3 years ago. Catherine stood beside me, co-directing the organization we'd built from shared trauma. Christopher ran our digital security workshops, turning his skills toward protection rather than revenge. The scholarship recipient spoke about her plans to study law, wanting to help victims navigate the justice system. She thanked us for showing her that survival was possible, that victims could become victors. Her words reminded me why we'd fought so hard. As I presented her with the scholarship certificate, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the awards glass. The scared girl who'd met Sarah at Starbucks was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned that true strength came not from forgiveness or forgetting, but from transforming pain into purpose. The event concluded with survivors and supporters mingling, sharing stories and resources. Parents exchanged contact information, students asked questions about staying safe online, and educators discussed implementing our programs in their schools. What Sarah had tried to destroy had instead created connections connection. That night, I updated our organization's website with photos from the ceremony. Our story, which began with betrayal and manipulation, had become one of resilience and community action. Sarah's name was rarely mentioned anymore. She'd become merely the catalyst for positive change. I closed my laptop and prepared for bed, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to help others. The girl who'd once thought pills were the only escape now ran programs teaching young people that survival was possible, that their voices mattered, that predators in positions of trust could be stopped. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine about planning next year's awareness event. I smiled, remembering how we'd met in crisis and built something lasting from the wreckage. Sarah had brought us together in the worst way possible, but we'd chosen to make something meaningful from it. The last thing I did before sleep was check our organization's email. Dozens of messages from people seeking help, sharing their stories, or offering support. Each one represented someone who wouldn't suffer in silence as I had. Sarah's legacy wasn't what she'd intended, but it was what we'd created from her destruction.